we're happy they're here. They're ask them questions. They're here for you and to explain what's going on. So go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Thanks. I'm Claire Markison. I work with Skeo. I've been in environmental consulting for over 30 years. And I've worked on a lot of different sites and quite a few wood treating sites. I'm hoping that the presentation today will help you better understand some of the concerns you've raised during the previous meeting, concerns you've raised to Danielle and others. So we're hoping we can answer some more questions for you tonight.
And hi, everyone. This is Eric Marsh, also with Skeo, and I am Skeo's lead person for coordinating support under EPA's Technical Assistance Services for Communities program with EPA. And I've just been working with Claire on this project since we got started back in the spring of 2021. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen if that's okay with everybody and get started. Okay. This was working earlier. Okay, can everybody see? Has it loaded yet?
It's loaded for me.
Okay. And how about the main room? Is everybody able to see in the big room? Okay. All right, so this first slide looks probably very familiar if you were here on the June meeting. So I'm going to go over some similar topics, but here, let me advance the slide. Oh, hold on. Okay, here we go. I apologize, just getting familiar with the controls. There we go. So the presentation tonight, we're going to go over why we are here for this second meeting with you all. We're going to go over the site operational history. I think we went over that really quickly. And the fact that there's nothing left on the site but paved areas or areas covered with gravel, etc. It's hard for you to envision what did this site look like many years ago, and how did they conduct wood treating. So I'll go over that so you can have a better idea how they released contamination that you're concerned about in your neighborhood. We'll go over more detail about the site contamination. And then I want to spend most of the time on the site cleanup. What has Union Pacific done to date? Because they actually have done some cleanup, and then they're proposing some additional cleanup. And we keep on hearing about the permit. So this permit's really important. It doesn't permit them to continue wood treating. The permit is just a legal document that specifies how they're supposed to finish up the cleanup of the contamination. So that whenever you hear the word permit, and I know Rodrigo has emphasized this a lot, it's basically they're planning to do a cleanup and they're going to memorialize how they're going to clean up the site in this permit. And if you don't like how they are going to clean up the site, that's where you have the opportunity, as you learn more about this site, to possibly influence and make changes on how they're going to clean up the site. Okay. Okay, so why are we here? Eric has gone over this a little bit. Skeo, we're a contractor to the EPA under the TASK program, which is focusing on technical assistance services for communities. And we do this a lot for Superfund sites and other sites that had contamination concerns to communities. And EPA has accessed Skeo through this program And specifically for this site, we're really focused on the community's concerns regarding the site contamination and the health effects related to the Houston Wood Preserving Work site. And instead of saying that whole big mouthful, I'm going to say the site. So whenever you hear me say the site, we're talking about the wood treating site. Again, we gave a pretty detailed, lengthy presentation in June this year about the regulations, about the wood treating site, things that they have done in the past, what are they doing in the upcoming future. And we're hoping tonight that we can present this information again, but it's going to be much more streamlined and really focused on, like I said earlier, the site history, how the heck did they do the wood treating, to give you an idea of, you know, what that site might have looked like back in the day and why you have concerns on the remaining contamination. And then really hone in on the cleanup proposal in the draft permit, meaning what is Union Pacific planning on doing to clean up the rest of the site? Okay, so are there any questions at this point, or can I go on? Okay.
We have a couple over here.
Okay.
Okay, I'm welcome, Alex. I continue to hear, they're cleaning up the site, and they've already started cleaning up the site. Last time we were here, they made a statement that, they were meeting expectations. Don't quite know what that means. They also made statements that, something referred to this yard, implies that there's other yards that, has been contaminated as well. And what's contaminated, what are they doing with the waste? When they clean it up, what do they do with this?
So I think your questions are going to be answered a little bit further into the presentation, but if they aren't, let's go back to that, because I think there are some slides that will help with that. Not the waste and where it's going to go. I think that might not be addressed, but all of those different yards and the different sources of contamination, what they've done, that's in here.
What about the waste? What do they do with that when they?
It depends on the type of waste. So soil would have to be disposed. They have to dispose of it either to a certified landfill or like the creosote that comes out of the ground. It goes to a disposal facility. So they don't just put it in the river. It has to go to an actual documented facility, and there's a paper trail for where it goes. I don't know exactly where this has gone, but there's documented where it goes. Yes, sir.
Can you verify clear what yards are we speaking of?
What yards? Yes, and Claire, I don't know if you jumped ahead. This is just one slide that shows the yard specifically, which yards. Is that in the presentation, which, kind of breaking out the different yards? This is the Englewood yard. It's on the Englewood yard. Does that make, do you know where that is?
You're speaking of the Union Pacific property, or you're speaking of the community property?
Here, let me see if I can.
No,
Well,
specific.
Okay.
What I can do, maybe if we can go, like what Danielle said, that maybe we can just go over the wood treating process quickly. And then we'll be able to show, like an aerial view to show you how far the contamination is spread, and it will show parcels, et cetera, if that's what you're referring to. So you can kind of get a big picture view of this.
While that's up, I'm just going to point out where this is. So this is the Englewood yard. This is the aerial photo. So this is Liberty Road right here.
Yeah, here's can you see here? Maybe I have a pointer that I can, a pen or a laser pointer, excuse me.
Did you have a question too?
Yeah. Here's Liberty Road. Can you see that on my screen? I have a pointer and it's a red dot.
Yes. Yeah, and that's where the wood treatment operation was on this, the
Yeah.
Inglewood, as opposed to the intermodal yard, which is the other.
The
yard.
intermodal yard's right here, this area, which now is totally covered, and we have another figure of that. But you can see that there was actually, this site has been it had operated for 71 years. And originally it was thought it was just this upper part here where you see a lot of treated wood over in this area. Then this diagonal area, if you're following my laser, separates the wood treating. A lot of the wood treating happened right here. This is where the wood processing actually happened. And then they dried the wood to the west over here. South of this diagonal line is the Englewood yard, this like triangle here, and it looks like there's two big tanks. So there was activity here as well. And I will get into that later in the presentation to show you where they're finding some of this tar-like creosote material seeping through the parking lot over there. But so hopefully I'll answer those questions that you just raised about where are the sources of contamination.
Later, right?
Yeah, but we can come back. I'll make sure we answer you. Yeah, and do we have one more
Yeah.
Lisa?
Okay, they talking about cleaning it up.
Yes.
Okay, just say dirt is just like flour. If you put something in, how you expect, like if you put water in flour, you can't get it out.
They're gonna show you kind of more detail.
Yeah.
That what their proposal is for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep that question.
Okay.
All right.
So none of these features, this is the general, like a cartoon of general wood treating process. And this is the type of process that occurred at this site. And basically, let me do a click. The first step of wood treating is, see this cylinder? This is a huge cylinder that you put a lot of wood inside of it. Wood that's just plain naked wood, where they strip the bark and they now want to treat this wood. So it goes into this cylinder. Let me hit another button here. Then the cylinder is flooded with liquid creosote. And again, creosote, I will show you a picture, is kind of a black tar-like material. They fill this cylinder with that creosote, liquid creosote, which was stored in these big tanks over here. So they put the wood and then they flood this cylinder. They shut this cylinder, flood it with creosote, and they apply pressure. And this pressure forces that creosote into the wood to make that wood, it just absorbs the creosote better under pressure. The fourth step, the fourth step, I'm waiting for it to show up. Here we go. So after the wood is treated, they stored it on site, but they would let go of the pressure. They would drain this cylinder of the creosote and they would reuse it. They would store it on site. They put it back in a tank to reuse again. But we all know housekeeping at a messy kind of operation is difficult. So some of it spills on the ground. When the wood is drying over here on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, some of it drips onto the ground. But in general, this is what occurred at the site. This is the type of operation that occurred at the site. Here's the wood drying area. So creosote. Rodrigo also mentioned DNAPL, dense non-aqueous phase liquid. Whenever you see the word DNAPL, just think of this thick. Yes? Is there a question?
Can I just pause you just for 1 second?
Yes.
I just have a question. Can you go back one slide? Okay, I know you guys have worked on other creosote sites, throughout the country. Is this, so what we're hearing from the residents is that there was a more of an open operation, like a more of an open dipping operation where they don't remember a cylinder. Is it common to have it as an open pit, dipping operation?
So, yeah, I live in Gainesville, Florida, and we have a Superfund site that's called the Cabot Carbon Coppers Wood Treating Site. And they had a similar operation, and instead of a totally enclosed, which this kind of looks like a building, it was more of, they just had like a pole barn, you know, a roof. So you didn't have a lot of heavy rains that we have here in Florida, you know, get into the wood processing facility, but it was an open building, like with like a pole barn, you know, a roof with open sides.
No.
And that's what I've seen in several wood treating sites that I'm familiar with that use creosote.
To splash the creosote every time. the wood
Okay, so
goes.
what they're saying is that, it came to, the wood would come, instead of that cylinder, it would come down a chute, like a roller coaster.
You know how after real bamboo shoot was?
Like a bamboo chute at the.
Yeah, like
at the- Right, okay, so the bamboo chute would come down, and then it would splash in the creosote, so creosote would splash everywhere, is that right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, that's kind of an important detail for when the soil.
Yeah,
is
it would open.
because if it open, it would splash.
Let me tell you how I know it. Cause they had a guy over there was liking me, and I wanted to know how they did that creosote coming down in that thing. So he said, we can't get close, because when that log come down, it splashed, and we would get burned, so we had to stay a distance. So I saw that wood coming through that chute, coming down, and when it would go through the chute, they would load it up on that thing there. But it went through a yellow, looked like a barn building, a two-story barn building, and they would let the wood come up through there, and come back down on the other side through a chute. And it was never closed in. You could see the creosote
You
splash.
could probably Google Earth that in that year.
Claire, before we finalize
And
this
then see.
presentation, do you mind if we just add a note of what the residents, had, just so that when we share it with the public, there's that kind of, this is a general operation, however, one in Houston, according to the residents, it was like, you know, and we can give that description, just so others, so that message is carried.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
What year was that? I'm just curious.
When it operated, was that the question? What year did they operate? That was from 1911 to 1984.
Remember.
Don't you remember that chute?
Oh, yeah, Miss Gladys, Miss Gladys property right across from there, so she knows those apartments on Solo and Whippers, that's her property, so she was there, she knows more about it.
Yeah, but I don't know, I was trying to distinguish which years does this operation display? And then Miss Glenn is saying,
Oh, for the,
was it
Yeah.
all during that time, or that you were saying that was not the operation?
No, that was not the
Okay,
operation.
so,
This
That's
is a
superficial.
general
I was
operation,
what
of
they're
what
beneficial.
could have been, but we didn't know that it was that shoot.
that
So,
should, yeah.
so that's where I'm saying, just so we don't have confusion, so that story carries forward, we need to update that slide with the.
Yeah.
So when it blew up, that's why we telling you, it blew all into
Just
the
so when it blew
neighborhood.
up, it blew up.
Yeah, it rained,
Yeah.
rain.
It wasn't enclosed from the top at all. The rain went down into it?
When it blew up.
When it blew up, it was
It
like
went
rain.
way up, and it was like it came black, so it had black rain. It, all the houses were black and.
I remember when it blew up.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
It was not closed in.
so,
And it
so
was
I,
not burned.
so, I just want to add, I mean, I'm in reading the historical documents, I did not see any pictures of their operation, but I did read that they had a number of retort cylinders So I know, I mean, we do know that they did do pressure treating of wood. Now, exactly how they remove the wood out of the cylinder, you mentioned a chute, you know, I don't know the details on that, but I do know they did do this kind of process, and they had above ground storage tanks and they had lagoons. And I'll get into that in a minute on what actually the features that released contamination that,
Okay.
you know, I'm aware of.
You are saying that they in fact did have that cylinder somewhere on site.
Yes, they had several retort cylinders.
Flashing, but they also had that. That's
We have some other information.
No, I was just saying that what they're showing now is just an upgrade. Back
Yeah,
in the day,
Yeah.
that was a
Oh, okay, so we made-
process.
We made upgraded.
Yeah, that's a new version, y'all have.
No,
Now it's
it
old.
was not that, it was not what she told us.
It was just like a narrow
This is
chute
just what they
that
wanna
only
show
went
you
out
now.
there and
That's
what to
what
do.
they want
And
you
it
to
was like
see.
the bamboo chute. It just
Okay.
comes down and splashes. It
Document.
was all over.
Document. This is helpful. Okay.
Fine.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Claire.
Sure. Okay, so this is a picture I pulled from one of their reports where they did some test pit excavations in that Englewood Yard area, the southern half of the site. And they actually have, this is a big puddle of, they dug a test pit and found, this is creosote, and a good picture, a heavy, thick tar-like liquid. And creosote doesn't dissolve easily in groundwater, but there are, if you put this creosote in a tub of water, there will be some chemicals in this thick mixture that can dissolve in groundwater. So you'll have this thick tar-like material in the ground, but you also will have some of the ingredients of this creosote are actually able to dissolve in groundwater. And so we'll get into that in a minute. You'll have a dissolved plume, and I'll go in much more detail on the plume because I know you had some concerns about that. Again, what are the ingredients of creosote? The only reason I'm bringing this up is I know that Texas A&M is doing some soil sampling in the 5th Ward, I believe. And they talk about analyzing the soil samples for polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. So I'm just getting you familiar with that term, PAHs. Those are components, an ingredient of this creosote. And there's phenols, there's other ingredients as well, but PAHs are the big component, big ingredient of the creosote. And it looks like tar and it smells like tar. So I'm sure you all have had some experience of that. Okay, so if this oily tar-like mixture creosote spills on the ground, I like this cartoon here. The black area here will just, it's DNAPL, but remember what I said earlier, if you see the term DNAPL, just assume that's creosote right here. It's heavy, it's gonna sink and move down through the soil. And soil, this is a technical term for soil, vadose zone, that's soil. So it moves through the soil and then it will reach groundwater. And like I said, there are some ingredients in the creosote that dissolve and you form this groundwater plume, dissolved plume. And this plume can move. It can move slowly under the ground because there's actually a slight slope underground. Not all ground is exactly perfectly flat. So it's going to move where the slope of the ground is. And again, the heavier ingredients, they don't dissolve well, and the lighter ingredients are going to form this dissolved plume. Here's a bigger view, closer look. Again, vadose zone meaning soil, mostly dry soil. It's above, here it is, this is soil. There's here some oily, that tar-like creosote will be stuck in the soil, kind of like what you saw in that picture showing that tar-like substance in the Englewood yard. That's what this is in the soil. And then it can actually reach groundwater and create the dissolved plume. So where did they release all that creosote? And I circled with red ink the main areas. Okay, right up here, which is really close to Liberty Road. This is the original process area where they treated the wood. And then they had an old process area where they treated wood right here. So that northeastern corner, close to Liberty Road, is where they handled a lot of creosote. And any spills went down this ditch. There's a ditch that goes all the way down diagonally where creosote would flow in the ditch. They also stored creosote waste here in a lagoon, a wastewater lagoon. And they also had a place creosote contaminated soil and waste in this, what they call an impoundment, which is like a pond or a lagoon. So those were the main locations where they used creosote. Here
We have a
you'll
question over
yes,
here.
yeah.
Streets and locations associated with the release sites.
Say that one more time.
Are there streets and locations associated with the release sites? She says near Liberty Road, but where?
This right here, that's Liberty Road. Basically, right there.
Here's Liberty Road, right along here, very close to the site. Here is the 5th Ward neighborhood up in here.
What streets?
What streets, where's Lockwood? Lockwood is right there. Right, that's Lockwood, you can see the loop, it's really hard to see, but there's a loop around Lockwood. There's Lockwood, Liberty Road, Waco.
Do you see Whitworth
With,
on that map?
it might be a better map that might show it,
Sure.
but I can bring up a map with you if you wanna look at yourself at it. Okay.
There's some
Mhm.
more maps too in this presentation. I'm not so sure all these roads up here are labeled because of the scale of the map. So we'll see better resolution maps in a couple of slides. But I just wanted, but the takeaway here is just showing you the major locations where creosote was handled. Here, and I circled Englewood Yard because in 2018, they actually located some creosote in the parking lot. That picture of that tarry material, that was in Englewood Yard. And they had an old lagoon that is now going to be part of their cleanup plan as well. It's underneath that paved Englewood intermodal yard. So again, I've already kind of gone over this. They had that surface impoundment. Just when you see the word impoundment, it's a pond. And that's where they disposed of tank waste and creosote contaminated soils. They had that recent process area and a ridge. So they had 2 wood treating process areas where they had those cylinders where they treated wood and stored the creosote. Then the drainage ditch, that contained creosote contaminated wastewater that flowed through piping below the railroad tracks and then led to a natural drainage ditch and a low-lying area. Here's that wastewater lagoon that I showed you on that map. It periodically flooded. So if there was any creosote contaminated wastewater in it and it floods, where's it going to go? right? It's going to spread, it'll go into a ditch, or it can overflow on the sides, spreading contamination. Englewood Intermodal Yard, they did some sampling because originally that wasn't part of the site, but they realized that they have now found some creosote contaminated soil under the paved parking area, and discovered that there at one time was a lagoon there and some above ground storage tanks. And then I've mentioned earlier, you saw how close the Wood-Old treating process was to Liberty Road, that there was some creosote contaminated soil along the right of way along that road. Okay, this is, it looks really complicated, but what I want to show you is these blue and green dots. These are wells. These are wells that Union Pacific has installed. Yes?
Can I just,
Yeah, go ahead.
a second, Reverend Powell wants to make a quick announcement.
Yes.
Once again, I know we took up y'all's evening for lunch and then those special occasions, but nevertheless, we do have some pizza out here and something to drink. I just want to make you aware that if you just simply raise your hand, we have some servers, they will bring it to you. Okay, because we don't want to interrupt long period of time presentation. So if you just be so kind as to raise your hand, someone will serve you. Okay, and I forgot to mention earlier, facilities are there, and there's another one up front, male and females too, and the lights on in there. So if you choose to go out, if this one is being utilized, feel free to do so. But please raise your hand. We're not going to bring you out here and not going to be something.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Larry. Go ahead.
No, thank you. Okay, so this map is showing you all the wells that Union Pacific has installed to see how far the plume has moved. And they need to know where this, and I'm talking about in groundwater, under the ground, there's contamination under the ground in the groundwater. So you can see they've put in quite a few wells, and you may even see some of them in your neighborhood. And there's over 100 of them. And I'll go into this in more detail, what else they're using the wells for. But originally they put these in so they could connect the dots and basically draw a plume to show where this groundwater is located, the contamination. Again, I didn't create any of my own figures because I wanted to use existing figures that EPA and TCEQ review to be able to approve certain documents. I didn't want to, create my own because I don't know the data as in detail as they do, and I don't want to mislead you. So I wanted to make sure I'm using figures that have been included in the draft permit. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here, the big takeaway here is, see this, I'm calling it blue. It's kind of a shaded blue blob right here. That is the dissolved creosote plume. And this is from their permit document dated 2020. So it's fairly, current representation of how far this plume has spread, okay? And as you can see, this is the 5th Ward neighborhood right up here. So there is this deep, and the dissolved plume occurs in different layers. There's shallow groundwater, there's deep groundwater. There's different layers under the ground of groundwater. The most widespread plume is in the deeper groundwater, and so this lobe here that you see in the neighborhood is deeper groundwater, and they're is clean water on a shallow zone above that. And that's important when you're talking about vapors getting into your home from contamination. And we can go into that in more detail if you have questions. But if you have, yes?
We do have a question in the chat,
Yes.
and it says, are they still drilling more water wells?
They are as part of the cleanup plan, and I will go into that in a minute. And I can actually show you on this figure, these squares. Can you see squares? The picture, I can try and enlarge it, but the squares are proposed new wells that they want to drill so they can remove any of that creosote. So wherever you see these squares, those are recovery wells. Those are wells where they're going to extract using a vacuum to remove creosote that's sitting at the bottom of the well. So the answer is yes, they plan to install, but again, they can't do that unless the permit, which is their cleanup plan, is approved. So does that help answer your question? So the answer is yes, they are going to install, they're planning to install more wells.
Okay, and this is also a question from the chat from Kimberly as well.
Yes.
And she asks, how deep are these wells?
These wells, I'm trying to recall, I think I can get back to you with that, but a guesstimate, because the slurry wall, which I'll get into in a minute, is about 60 to 80 feet deep. So that's roughly a general, if it gives you an idea of how deep these wells are, they're anywhere from like 60 to 80 feet roughly. And I can be more specific. I don't know off the top of my head, but that definitely, I think, is a good ballpark on depth. And are there any other questions?
Yes, ma'am. We have one here in
Yes.
person as well. I'll let him ask.
Yeah.
We're drilling a well. Is there any past information about how effective these wells are gonna be, trying to recover whatever under the ground?
That's a really good question. Claire, when you talk about the recovery wells and that process, the question is about how effective the recovery wells are going to be.
Okay.
I think that one of the diagrams a little bit further on.
Yeah.
Does answer that question.
Yes.
About how effective
Yep.
that really is.
And please,
So there,
Say that again?
is there any past information that would state that this is an effective way to do this?
They have, I think that they do have, Claire, when they are proposing the recovery wells, are they, do they have past data showing, what they've recovered in the past and what they expect to recover?
I didn't go into that depth.
Okay, that's all right.
But I will, I mean, and these are here, let me say effectiveness.
Yeah.
I can give some, these are really good questions, and I will try to cover them when we get to how they plan to use these recovery wells to address the DNAPL or the creosote in these areas. And I think it'll become more clear. This diagram is a very busy diagram, but it's the best one I could find from their documents. But I'm gonna go into this, how they're gonna operate those recovery wells in a few slides.
So this is another form of reverse osmosis, right? I know.
Yeah, there's a really good diagram that she has a little bit further, and it shows kind of cross section of what that looks like and how that's given work. So I'll go to the other.
That's a question here that says, what should the community expect out of this process?
Okay. So Claire, I think that we're getting, and looking at time too, I think that we're getting a lot of questions. I think that the community is really curious about the proposed recovery, or the remediation.
Okay, okay.
So kind of giving you that feedback, and looking at the time. Maybe, I don't know how many more slides you have in this section, but I think that we're gonna have a lot
Yeah,
of interest.
Okay, so I'll go quickly through this and spend more time on what's concerning you all, especially when it comes to their Union Pacific's ideas and plans on cleanup. This is just showing a larger view of the plume, and I wanted to show you, how far it's spread, and you can see it's spread across Liberty Road, this blue area, the creosote plume. So it also, there's very little creosote on the west side, so the bulk of it is by the intermodal yard and then across Liberty Road. Okay, here's what you all have been waiting for. So Union Pacific has done some cleanup, and basically they removed highly contaminated soils for off-site disposal. And when they say off-site disposal, it's not across the street in your yard. They have to transport it to a permitted facility that is authorized to receive such waste, and they manage it and store it in a landfill or other type of containment far away from where people live. They have cleaned out this southern drainage ditch. It had a lot of creosote in it. And then they have this blue area is a concrete cap where they have creosote contaminated soils in the Englewood yard. So that's something, they call that cleanup. There is also part of the cleanup, it's very tiny, but I have a tiny little feature here. They have a DNAPL collection system that they installed to remove creosote, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. We've gone over this. I just talked about this. I don't want to spend a lot of time. They basically emptied this impoundment. They tore down the wood processing areas, got rid of the tanks, moved the contaminated soils off-site, covered with a cap. So their big solution for these facilities is remove contaminated soils and cover the areas with concrete, dirt, or railroad gravel, also known as ballast.
Just to clarify,
Yes.
say the cap, there's contaminated soil left in place under the
Yes.
cap.
Yes.
Right? They just
Correct.
basically put paving on top of it and said nobody touch it.
Yes.
And it prevents direct exposure.
Yes.
That's clean up.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Correct.
They removed it from the green and they just covered it up. And the other stuff. Okay.
They removed the worst of the contamination. I don't know the detail of what the residual, there probably is some residual contamination, because that's why they have restrictions on these areas, but the cap prevents putting clean soil on top, clay, asphalt. It prevents anybody from coming in direct contact with any residual contamination. But the heavy contamination, the highest, was removed and disposed of off-site at those main features. Here is what I was telling you all about the Englewood Intermodal Yard. You probably, I imagine your community has seen activity where they're pumping out creosote, and this is a sump, and they have 3 of these, and they actually pump it out into a container. The container is then removed for off-site disposal at a permitted facility. They also have dug up some soils and disposed those of disposed off-site at Liberty Road right away. They also had plans to, I don't know if this has been completed. Do you, Danielle, that in April, they submitted a plan to disturb some of these covered areas? Which,
Yeah, Ms. Edwards, where'd you go? You saw some activity at the yard. Do you know if they've done this improvement project? And Claire, do you know, you might not know, but were they supposed to inform the community that that was happening?
I would, normally that, I mean, from what I've seen in the past with RECRA and Superfund facilities, whenever there's any kind of disturbance near a residential area, usually a certain distance, or, usually it's the local government sends out letters to communities, notifying them that some kind of activity is happening, and they are living within a certain distance of where this activity is happening, and that.
Ms. Bill has a question.
I live 4900 block, I live 2906 Lavender, and it's in the living 4900 block and 5000 Liberty Road is across the street from me, and there's been activity, very loud activity going on since last week.
Yeah.
And no one's notified me. I had to call Union Pacific to try to get some of the noise, or something, do something about the noise.
Okay.
So that's, I guess it's the cleanup process. I have a video of it.
Okay, yeah, if you guys have videos, if you have set, whatever you can send the impact, or you can send it to me, you can send it to Joanna.
I know that in that 2016 so-called cleanup, or whatever it is they call themselves doing, they were moving that soil. They didn't inform the community, because I got the call from somebody who was standing there trying to videotape them moving that soil. And they weren't informed, and they lived over there in that area.
Okay, so there has been no public notice. Cookie, did you have a question?
I'm a simple thing. Because I know it
This
doesn't
is what they
100%.
do.
So this, what they're doing, is
That's
it
what they're
done
doing.
anywhere else? If it is, can we see the results in black and white to see how effective
This
this
don't help.
is?
Uh-huh.
Because,
Now they got that.
you can mask for so long.
Yeah, so you
That's
want
what
to
I'm
see
saying.
elsewhere in the country.
Where I get, it's about the results of the results that has been done before. If this
It
is done-
has.
Okay.
Hey, go ahead.
I work with Superfund in Texas City. It works, but it takes a lot of money.
But there's always a but.
Yeah, but you got to monitor it.
Well, I'm concerned about all of the arsenic. The only better or information that we get from the railroad once a year is giving us, calling our attention to the amount of arsenic still in the ground,
Okay.
and whether or not they can get their permit.
Yes.
Yes, so we get that.
Yes.
So, but any of these other changes and all, my property is right across the street from the railroad, and I don't have any information that they have ever done any of this. So I don't know from the other residents whether or not they have ever seen any digging or concrete or anything at all.
So you're bringing up, I want to add that you all are bringing up really good concerns and comments. Their concerns need to be presented at these public meetings, when a bit like the next one, I think we still don't know the date of the next public meeting where you can voice your concerns about their cleanup plans, because you've personally experienced that a lot of activity has been happening right across the street from your house, and you were not notified, and that there should be some public notification requirement and information to ensure your safety while they're doing these cleanups. That would be a really good comment to bring to the table at these public meetings regarding the permit.
I want to piggyback on what Claire just said. Ms. Sandra had mentioned that we should have a prep meeting when we get that date for when TCEQ, when the state is going to have that next meeting about this permit or this piece of paper, they say. That we should have a prep meeting and talk about these important items so that we can go in there organized, right? Because this is
Right.
y'all's meeting, and you guys need to be able to have a voice and go in there with a plan. And so, if you signed in, we've got your details. We'll be sure to contact you and let you know when that meeting is and when we can all get together again. Maybe Reverend will let us come here. I'll buy pizza next time, and we can strategize.
Just one last question. Now, have we presented all of the evidence that you've been presented to us tonight to the EPA? They have gotten all that. So have we then heard a response back from them as to what they can do, because they are only an intermediary? So what is it that they suggest to us that they can do to help us in response to the information that we have already presented?
I cannot speak.
If I may, yeah, we have the information. We shared.
Oh, you do have?
We shared information with the EPA, past, present, and we're continuously gathering information and data to share with the EPA. I know some of you may have heard that we're working with Texas A&M to address some of the environmental concerns here, not just the creosote issue, but the creosote issue is a major issue. Because when we present that to TCEQ, PUC, any of the others, first thing they'll tell you that they're not doctors. So that's in response to your arsenic perspective. Yeah, arsenic causes death, but there are many other chemicals in creosote as well. We have chemists who are working on it. But I want you all to understand that, and Ms. Metcalf pointed out earlier, this is not Ms. Metcalf's fight. This ain't Danielle's fight. It's your fight. Your fight, the comments that you make, the questions that you may have. The people on the panel, it's not their fight. They will provide you with the information, the data, everything you need, but you're the ones who are living it. You're the ones who are experiencing it day in, day out. Some of you for years, some of you for decades, some of you your entire lives. And if you don't tell that story, you know, the data, the information, the facts, the documentation, we can connect it to the city, the county, the state, the EPA, but you will have to force them to change it.
And I'd like to add, there's power in numbers.
You
So
have
tell
to
five
do it.
friends,
Right.
tell five friends. The
Don't-
more people you get, the more power you got.
You don't allow nobody else to hold your money. So don't let them dictate your life. This is your life and your livelihood. All the entities here that are part of this evening's gathering, they're here to assist you, to educate you, to give you guidance, to give you direction. And if there's anything else that we can add to that picture, we will. But it's your fight. It's your fight. Tell your friends, your neighbors, your family. I know many of you know folks who are no longer with us, who passed as a result of this entity, that, whether it's poor air they're breathing, whether it's lead in their water, whether it's cancer, whether it's leukemia, whatever it is. And I want y'all to understand too that this is an environmental issue. What we're talking about here is environmental racism. You have been discriminated against, not just this community, but other communities of color in the city of Houston, the state of Texas, and across this country. And if you don't stand up and do it, who's gonna do it? Who's gonna do it? You have to. The entities are here to assist you in helping, whatever it is, whatever knowledge, you know, that you may have. The scientists from Texas A&M, I'm not a scientist. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I'm not part of academia. You know what I mean? That I'm simple. I don't know the answers to all of these questions that you may have. But it doesn't mean that your questions can't be answered. You see, it can't be addressed. But you have to have the willingness, desire, determination to seek those answers, not just for yourself, but for your neighbor, for your children, for mama, for daddy, for grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunts, niece, and nephew, your entire community, and the community next to your community. Because the one thing about environmental issues, it doesn't care what your gender is, what your race is, what your religious belief is. It doesn't care about any of that. It kills. And unless you begin to address it, it will address you. And I want to stress the fact that if there's change to be bought in this community and this community along with others, this is not a 6-month, 2-year issue. You may have to fight this the rest of your life. But who are you fighting it for? Your communities. You know, so that you and others after you, your children's children, should they decide to reside and rebuild this community, will have a safe environment to live in. Why do you have to move out? Why do you have to be bought out? You know, you didn't create that problem. You invested a lot of time, money, and grew a family in your community. Why all of a sudden now, because it's unsafe for you to live here, you gotta go and then they give you pennies on the dollar. So if you really want to fight that, just fight face. I'm director of co-host. Our model is basically, if you're not at the table, you own the meeting. You have an opportunity to be at the table to address any and every concern. We recently had the EPA administrator here. I took him on the tour. Everybody was advertised. He sat there and he talked to him, and some of you in this room were there with him, you know, and then saw the opportunity. We have an opportunity now to address some concerns. The reason why a lot of the Creosote issues and some of the other environmental issues haven't been addressed in the state of Texas by the EPA is because of states' rights. The federal government doesn't want to override the state in its issue, but your voices make the difference. The data, the information that they gather make the difference. You see, because I hate to say this, but basically, the EPA can't force nobody to do it. As sad as it may seem, they can't force them to do it. But they can find them. They can cut off the water. What I mean by the water, the money flow. You know what I mean? That they need in order to sustain themselves. You know what I mean? But they get subsidies all the time. Everybody gets subsidies from the federal government. But that's another topic within itself. What I was going to say is that you fight this fight. This is your fight to fight and continue to, no matter how long it takes.
And you're so right, Reverend Caldwell, because what I want to do is, I think the point that we discussed earlier, and y'all can, you know, be a united front at the next public meeting, but let me get through the remaining technical issues, because this will help you formulate more questions. You just came up with some great questions to ask at the meeting. Your dust concerns, how effective are these wells? For example, right now they are pumping DNAPL, creosote out of wells across the site. It's not that effective, the process that they're doing right now. And so here's a well on the right side of the screen. I mentioned, you know, these wells at range 60, 80 feet. DNAPL's heavy, it sinks to the bottom of the well. So it's difficult to pump that out. You need a really strong pump to remove this material. In fact, if you see in this slide, the TCEQ said this is deficient. You're not getting enough out. You're going to have to pump these more often. So that's something that was done, you know, recently, fairly recently. They were doing it once, switch from once to twice a month, pumping DNAPL out of wells. But they're going to do more. I'm talking about right now, what are they doing now to clean up? Here's the Englewood Intermodal Yard. You can see creosotes oozing out of the parking lot. They installed those 3 sumps and they're pumping this creosote out. They actually dug up the parking lot in 2018 and removed some. You might have seen that activity. So there are some things that they are doing, but they still have more to do. And this is where the permit comes in. And I'm almost done, but these are key things that you want to comment on if you don't agree with in the concept of their plan. The big plan for them is to install an underground vertical wall. They call it a slurry wall. It's a wall. It's like a cement wall. You'll see in this figure, here's a wall. This red is the DNAPL. There's a really large DNAPL area within the fenced facility. There are small, much smaller areas of DNAPL off-site. We'll get into that in a minute. Across in your neighborhood, underneath the ground, there are some localized areas of creosote, but the bulk of it is on the site, and they want to put this wall around it. By doing so, you're preventing that creosote from dissolving into the groundwater because there's a wall there. It's cement. And then they're going to also pump out this creosote. So that's the big remedy they're proposing to get the worst of the contamination. But what about the wells outside? What about areas? So here's a slurry wall. It's an aerial view, this red line. It goes deep down into the ground, 65 to 80 feet is this wall. Inside this area here is where most of that creosote is. But there is a little bit of creosote in a couple of these wells north of Liberty Road. So the second part of the remedy, here's another picture of the slurry wall. Oh, and here, and you're saying, how are they going to build this slurry wall? I'll get to the recovery wells in a minute. It basically looks like a monstrous chainsaw. It actually, I've seen it here at our wood treating site, Superfund site in my town. It's like a big chainsaw. And while they saw this big rut in the ground, they fill it with the cement. So it does it all in one process. It's pretty fascinating, actually. And so that's what they're planning to do, is to build one of those around the creosote on the facility. Here it is again, this red line. And then recovery wells is the second part of the plan. These square boxes, they're going to extract DNAPL. There's a little bit, it's not as much, most of it's here, but there's still some off-site that traveled off-site. So it's not going to travel anymore if they put this wall around the worst of it, but to get the little bit that's in these where they're proposing to install these recovery wells, these square boxes, they're going to use what they call a multi-phase extraction system. And I'll tell, here's a map again showing the wells where they're going to see it. They're actually going to be in your neighborhood. They're proposing to install a bunch of recovery wells. Here, so what is a recovery well? They're going to install this well into the creosote, into the groundwater, and then they're going to attach a pump to it. And this is just a cartoon, but they will attach a pump, and it's portable. It'll probably be on a flatbed truck or some kind of mobile situation. And they'll go to each of these recovery wells and vacuum extract. So much stronger than what they're manually doing right now, trying to remove creosote, which is not that effective. I think somebody had a comment on that. Now you're going to take force and vacuum this creosote out, and that's much more effective. And then they're going to pump it out and put it into a container and remove it off-site to a permitted facility. And finally, what's the final remaining plan of cleanup? They're going to restrict use of groundwater within the city-owned right-of-way, basically saying you can't put in a well and use the groundwater. And if you're on public water supply, you're not ever going to be exposed to the site contamination. And then while they're pumping and extracting the DNAPL in those wells, those recovery wells, and while after they've installed this vertical wall, they're going to continue sampling the groundwater at those over 100 wells that I showed on a map to see if this remedy is working, and you're starting to see the contamination decline and get smaller. The plume will get smaller and smaller, where all you have left is the main contamination in that fenced area of the site. That's their plan. It hasn't happened yet. The next steps, this is the last slide. The Department of State Health Services, DSHS, has indicated that, and you all have indicated that, we have voiced concerns that there hasn't been enough sampling to determine if vapors from the site are entering your homes. And there's a recommendation by DSHS to conduct more sampling. The DSHS is planning to conduct a public health assessment. Are you being exposed today with unacceptable levels of contamination? That is something they are planning on doing. I don't know at what stage they are with that process. Once they're done with that process, they'll have a report, and it will summarize their findings and also give recommended actions on how you can protect yourself. And then the state TCEQ is extending the public comment period. That's what I was talking about earlier about the cleanup permit. The date has yet to be determined. I don't know if Rodrigo has more detail on that, and I'm sure he's going to keep you posted on that. And it's important to participate and voice your concerns. And if you go in with the united front, even have index cards. Everybody gets one with a question. Somebody's going to ask questions about groundwater. Somebody's going to ask questions about soil. Somebody's going to ask questions about, hey, I thought there was this chute that they threw timbers in and it splashed. You know, these are the types of questions that you need to ask. You know, did those activities spread the contamination and you haven't sampled where that spread has occurred? You know, we have concerns about that. Those are the types of things you need to ask to get action. And that, I have a slide that this slide deck, I think, is going to be shared with you all so you can get a lot more information to answer questions that I haven't covered. And that is the last slide, so we can have some more discussions. Any questions?
Who's gonna be conducting the test to ensure that the level or whether it's supposed to be, what entity is going to be conducting those tests?
So the Union Pacific Railroad has hired their own consultant who reports everything to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, which is our state level EPA. So they're in control of the site, they're in control of sampling, but it's overseen by the state EPA.
So they're gonna be putting the bill.
Yeah.
Okay, but they also have to report to the state. Okay, how much transparency is gonna be integrated in that system?
So Claire, based on what you've seen so far, how much transparency has there been? And do you suspect there might be moving forward to give the community confidence that the contractor hired and controlled by Union Pacific is doing the right thing?
Yeah. I honestly feel that the way documentation is presented, they're given, so TCEQ's RECRA, the people that are the lead, you know, the legal lead on this oversight with some support by EPA, because they have the authority to make decisions on cleanup. Their process, in my opinion, is just a little bit cumbersome because a lot of the information that the consultant collects, they put in a form. It's like a canned form. So it's not presented in a manner that you can it easily flows, tells a good story, you know. So I find it difficult. I mean, I went through thousands, literally thousands of pages of documents. And usually they'll just have a quick summary that sounds good, but then you have to go into a lot of attachments, appendices. It's very difficult to follow. So I personally found the documentation quite cumbersome and not readily transparent, but that was just my opinion, trying to filter it down to something that I can try and hopefully give you a, you know, a cut to the chase answer on. It's
A bit more specific about this, because what I gave is a vague oversight about this situation. Will there be a number attached to these reports that we can call? That way, whomever conducting these reports will be a little bit more abreast at how to inform, telephone or whatever, instead of us going through documents ourselves, because I'm sure there's gonna be a whole lot of in there that is above our heads to understand.
Well,
would there be something of a liaison to inform?
Like, so for example, I think on the previous, and we prepared a lengthy report also. There was one document literally that was several thousand pages long. And on page 2000 something, I finally found a figure showing where they sampled soil along the roads. And I finally found, you know, a map showing where they did some soil vapor sampling. It was deep in the document and there wasn't a table of contents for me to locate it. Do you see what I'm saying? So I was able to find it and it's like, sorry. Yes.
I think that what I think I might be able to answer this question too. At the last TCQ the permit meeting, there were several individuals who spoke that gave their phone numbers from TCQ's representatives and said, if the community has questions, call us. That is something to bring up at the meeting and make sure that we have their number, and then we do some test calls and making sure that they're there to respond. I think that that's an excellent question, especially through the process, knowing that they're going to get those phone calls from the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me say this, it's not, TCQ is gonna give you answers to questions, but you need a second opinion. You know, I mean, you don't need to just rely on what TCQ tells you, what they're saying. And the reason why I say that is because TCQ's been around for a while. Have they addressed your issue yet?
Yeah.
No, so we have, and I didn't mention this earlier, but there are other entities we're working, other nonprofits, other environmental entities, other scientists from TSU, EDF, I mentioned A&M, LSU. We have some entities that can get the answer and can simplify it. Because if Danielle provided you with the data and you read it, you probably wouldn't understand it. You know, it needs to be simplified and brought into a simple term where you can relate and understand what is being said, what the numbers, what that data says, and what's its impact on you and your community.
Can you do that for us, Daniel? Put it in layman terms?
Well, actually, we expect in the new year, we're having a team at Rice put together a communication strategy for us, and we will have some more information. Cookie's had her hand up for a little bit.
Okay, so the last time when I was on Zoom with Southern Pacific, it was a question asked to them, do they have any outside people coming in to test as well as Union Pacific? And they said, no, you burn me once, you can burn me once, but you can't burn me twice, so I need to know, are they willing or open to have someone else, when they go and vacuum, they supposed to be vacuuming, so it could be more than one set of eyes seeing what the results are?
That's a question that should be asked directly to them and put pressure on them to do that. And I know that Harris County Pollution Control has done some sampling. And the city health department's done some sampling. I think you need a bunch of eyes on it like that. And more transparency. when they're going out, how the community can observe, unsafe distance, et cetera. Those are all need to be asked directly to them.
Everybody gonna be in this thing to read, 61,000, 62,000 pages.
So that's a clear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're open to that.
That was kind of like what my last question about saying, doing all that, you know, we know now. How do we assess the progress that they are making in terms of where we want to go, what our goals are? I mean, have they done enough? Are they doing enough? Are they current? Are they behind on what their progress and eliminating the problems? Or how do we assess where they are?
Well, one, do you think that they're doing well?
Well, I don't know. It seems like
It seems like, but it
I'm
seems
trying
like
to
they're-
figure out. It seems like they're doing something, but I don't know how I assess it.
So that's where I think leaning on groups like, with Coco, leaning on Lone Star Legal Aid, and some of these other groups are really criticizing and saying, no, they haven't done enough. Just up the road, you have the, North Carolina Superfund site, the same issues, the same contaminants. And that has been addressed in the past. This has not been addressed. So I would say that, they have been doing a great job in responding, effectively to this. So, and I think that having some of those case studies and looking elsewhere and asking, you guys don't need to do this, ask the researchers, ask Coco, ask Impact. Everybody said what you need from us. They're trying to find those answers. So trying to find those case studies, so that you can have your gauge on what you need to know, and form your own opinion about it.
Well, I wanna know, is there a deadline for them saying they cleaning it up? I wanna know, not no 10, 20 years down the road. Is there a deadline?
There's a deadline to do the actual, once they set the permit, there's gonna be a schedule that they have to follow, implement the action, but the deadline to clean up is based on how effective that remediation strategy is.
So that kind of ties into one of the questions from Kimberly in the chat, and she says, has there been an approximate timeline given of the cleanup once it gets approved? How about how long would it take?
Claire, have you
That-
seen?
I have not, here, I'm gonna jot that down. I have not seen a timeline.
And based on the other creosote sites that we've worked on and to have similar response to them, how long has it taken those to get to a point that meets?
Yeah, so here in Gainesville, they had a record of decision, a cleanup plan in '89, and they're still testing and seeing where they're putting their barrier wall. One barrier wall's up. They finished on one side of the site. The other side of the site, they're still doing. So even though they've sampled, they know where the contamination is, they're going for this vertical barrier wall. There's still going to be a lot of sampling to know, kind of like when you design a house, you have to have a blueprint, and they design the blueprint to see where this wall needs to be, what's the soil type, how deep do we need to go, et cetera. They do some fine-tuned sampling to make sure they're putting the wall exactly where it needs to be. So they're still designing that. And that remedy was selected back in 89, 90 timeframe. So I'm not saying it's going to take that long, but
I'm gonna be honest with you, upfront,
it takes, yeah, remedies.
no timeline, okay? Because the chemicals that we're dealing with, we talk about Creosote, these things can last beyond my lifetime, your lifetime, your children's lifetime, and your children's children's lifetime. You see, so there is, if they do come in and begin the cleanup process, that process is ongoing. That's why they want to buy you out.
So pretty much they
But I can look, I mean, our site, half of the site, so if there's two responsible people, there's two companies at this wood treating site where I live. One company is doing things very quickly because they want to just cleanse their hands of their responsibility. So they built their vertical wall and it's in. Their extraction system's in. In fact, I walked the site this year. I'm working on that site, making sure the remedy is working as it's supposed to. So, you know, that was done fast on one half, and the other half, it's taking a lot longer. So that's why I'm curious. I'll see if I can, that's a good question. And there should be answers out there. TCEQ probably knows, you know, because they're much more knowledgeable of the Union Pacific site than I am, because they've worked on it for years. They should. That's an excellent question to ask. You might be able to get answers even before the public meeting.
Okay, I have a question. Yeah. Two questions. Just piggyback off of her question, you know, you said once they get the permit, then we're trying to figure out, but how long does it take to get the permit? Can they just say, oh, we'll get the permit in 20 years? Like, they're trying to get the permit like as soon as possible, but they're holding up the permit because of this public meeting. And there's a lot of people that oppose the permit, that oppose this remedy for cleaning the site up. When is the next meeting, and can we get a copy of this PowerPoint? Yes. And
The next meeting is gonna be February 8th.
February 8th, where is it? Right here.
Right here, same back channel, same back time.
Yes. Do you have a question?
I did. I wanted to know the percentage of the community that is aware of this issue.
I don't know.
enough.
Not enough.
Not enough.
No.
Do you guys have like
I don't.
canvassing team that's
We do not even head up.
So we have like 5 minutes before our Zoom's gonna kick us off. So there's a couple
Yeah.
more questions in the chat. One is,
Okay.
what do they recommend people do while we wait on cleanup? And that's from Lori.
That's an excellent question to ask TCQ.
Okay. So that one might be better for a different
What do you do yeah, so from Lori, what do you do while you wait for cleanup? Well, first you attend these meetings, but second, that is an awesome question to ask TCQ during that permit meeting, because you're still being exposed, because Creosote is still there. Yeah, what are some safety precautions that the community needs to be aware of? That, you know, just in general, what do you do while you wait?
Do you know exactly what their permit permits them to do?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer that question after, just because I know this didn't answer.
Okay, and then we have an announcement from Nia Buckley. She says, before the community leaves, I want to share that my team and I are completing an advocacy project to help spread awareness on the contamination. We are looking for community members to share their stories. So she might be somebody that you would want to contact, because I think that might be, so her,
Buckley, please,
yeah.
Contact, and then
Yeah.
connect.
We got her email address, and then can you see her email on the
Yeah.
screen? Okay.
I also have a response to what she was asking about, how many in the community, how many in the community know about
Yeah,
this.
like the percentage.
I'm a Fifth Ward block captain.
Okay.
So when we go out, do our duty, we also give the information about the creosote impact.
Okay.
Now, it's about them coming in, because this been going on for so long, and they've been told for this and that, and you know, they're like, whatever, you know. So we're putting our feet to the ground and knocking on doors and letting people know we're here.
Okay, so you are right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. If they listen, if they willing to participate, that's on them though.
Right.
Because just to close this out, wrap this up, because it's about to kick us off.
Okay.
So,
Union Pacific, they to sit down and talk to us
They haven't yet. They were gonna do in October, but then, the spike in the Delta variant, they pushed it off. So it's gonna be in the new year, January, February.
So they are,
They have to, yeah, they're gonna have a meeting. It's gonna be TCQ and Union Pacific.
Do we need to do anything about
I think Miss Sandra was gonna close us out.
I'll be here if you have more questions.
We're about to wrap it up because they're gonna boot us off of Zoom, our something is over. But if y'all wanna continue to chat, by all means, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire and Eric.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like to thank
You're
you all.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody on the phone. I appreciate y'all time and y'all effort and y'all explanation. Y'all have a blessed night, and we should try to do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
While we're out here.
Good report. Y'all did a great job.
Thank you so much.
Y'all did a great job. I learned more tonight than I learned.